see at this university. You're lucky if you see people before noon, so 9 o'clock is very early for us. I'd like to welcome everybody to this conference. I won't read the title for you, it's up there. Egalitarianism and Inequality, blah, 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 blah. Okay. The idea behind this conference or workshop actually is very simple. While the two speakers are preparing, I've known Bruce Kapferer for many years now through the involvement with my involvement with his flagship journal, Social Analysis, which he founded while he was at the University of Adelaide in Australia. Then onward towards University College London, and most recently at the University of Bergen in Norway, where he founded the Egalitarian Project about 5 years ago. And I had the honor of good fortune of giving a paper about 3 or 4 years ago now, when the project was still just about starting, and met a very lively group of people. And I remember asking Bruce many times, tell me what this project is all about. And instead of him giving a long lecture on this topic, and by the way, he's going to write a book about it, it's much easier to invite people from the project just to talk. Okay, so this is why we're here. And it just happened that at the time that this center was being established, I think we're in its 2nd or 3rd year now. I thought it might be quite interesting. Now, for those of you who know anything about the center, you also notice that people from these two projects share many interests, despite the title. Okay, so if you can get beyond the title, you'll discover that we actually have many common research interests and talking points. For those of you who are married, your marriage counsel will tell you opposites attract. So despite the title, maybe you'll find out we'll have a lot of interesting things to talk about. But in this case, it's more like a blind date. Okay, I'm the matchmaker. Alain, meet Bruce, Bruce, meet Alain. We'll see what happens. Well, we might have a second date. People might say, hey, let's have a more research cooperation, get engaged. We might even get married. Say, hey, let's have some kind of joint exchange or more, whatever. Or, they could go at each other and fight it. They might get divorced before they get closer. Who knows? Okay. So I don't know. This is why we're having this conference. So I'll just leave it at that. I won't bother to introduce the two speakers because both of them are very well-known, well-established academics with very long publication records. Alain has published up to, recently retired from Paris, published close to 24 books. Likewise, Bruce Kapferer also has published many books and still very active despite the fact that both of them are recently retired. With that, I think we'll just start, and I'd like to invite Bruce Kapferer to begin by giving a presentation. Good morning, Bruce.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thanks very much for inviting me and your girls and women involved here. I've enjoyed a number of good meals and good conversation already. I don't know really how to introduce this thing, but I will try. Do a little bit to sort of fill myself in and others on what we've been doing. The actual project was conceived by me in relationship to a request actually by the University of Bergen to try for one of these large ERC grants. And I had thought that actually to get one of these grants, you have to do something which will attract the interest of not just anthropologists, but anthropologists, I guess everyone here from the scheme of anthropology. You have to actually do something which will grab the interest of a diverse number of scholars. Judged by every day. Sometimes very difficult for them because anthropology is even more so these days a kind of marginalized discipline. Although in my view it is the actual queen of all the social sciences. Mainly because it doesn't belong to any one of them and stands in critical relationship to it. But we'll get to some of that because I've got an ideology of critical discipline, which is found not necessarily in anthropology, very few anthropology, or very few anthropology. Anthropology is something which is open to anyone, everyone, great range of things. It's a particular kind of attitude which is, I think, empirically founded, but in a sense, it's an attitude which stands in a critical relationship to all those human beings, things, and practice. It's a subject which is organic to the world, so it's continually shifting its perspective and altering according to the situations the researchers who put this out in capacity. I think it's not something with any final end. Because human beings are continually inventing, creating, and working on. And so that gets me to egalitarianism, because in a sense, the whole issue of egalitarianism, which I began rather in a very stumbling fashion to think about it, is really an issue which underpins, I think, many of the social sciences and related disciplines, particularly those that were born in the West. This is one of the big problematics of any kind of anthropology, in a sense, to break free from some of the historical and ideological grounds of their own birth. Okay, so, in a sense, anthropology in its birth, in a sense, it's of course born in Western and European contexts, but it is the one discipline that's tried, in a sense, or at least practitioners of most of them, with great difficulty, cannot be achieved, to break free from the constraints, historical, acceptable constraints, under which their attitudes have formed. So, egalitarianism, in a sense, egalitarianism, or the idea of equality and egalitarian notions as we understand them in much of literature these days, is actually something which is more probably a vertical concept of it, possibly in relationship to great periods of revolution in the West. I'm thinking of European movements, of course, maybe the English Revolution, which is underrated in much discussion. Certainly the so-called American Revolution, or actual War of Independence, and of course the French Revolution, which sort of marks, I suppose, for many people, the modernity of the modern period, and the period in which the West, we currently sort of, in a sense, rather take a spirit and perhaps currently experiencing this decline. I began to think of egalitarianism well before this project began, because I've been working in Sri Lanka for a number of years on ritual forms, actually, mythological structures. And then I went back to my its situation, how different the situation there compared with Sri Lanka. And nonetheless, it had a very similar kind of nationalistic struggle involving ethnic divisions and separations. And Australia also, like Australia, situation was one step off apartheid South Africa in many ways, very white nation, very exclusionist, controlled its immigration as nothing now. But it had a very, very aggressive egalitarian ideology, real sense that everyone is equal and no one person is any better than anyone else. And I began to look at that in relationship to Sri Lanka, which was my analysis at the time, was not an egalitarian system, but one really based in hierarchy. But nonetheless, it seemed to have some sort of flow over into the kind of situation that I was looking at in Australia. So I was interested in a sense in ethnic hostility and things like that. And in Australia I began to argue that the emphasis on equality and that no one person was any better than another, which is very aggressive in Australia. It's still very strong there at the moment. Gets stronger all the time. But that very aggressive emphasis on equality and individual autonomy spurned, in a sense, an intense racism, which was extremely, which was born in a system of radical exclusion. Like Australia policy, for example, distinguished all sorts of people as not being relevant for immigration into Australia, and that white Australian policy lasted right up until about 1969. And in many ways, that policy, even though it's been abandoned, still continues. So, for example, current attitudes towards Islamic immigrants, for example, into Australia, and manifests many dimensions. Long-term history of exclusivist thought, which I argue is great, is very much connected to this individualist, egalitarian ethos. An ethos which is not too different from the kind of ethos that underpinned South African apartheid, but of course can be discovered throughout the West, in England, no doubt. Where, in a sense, when you get egalitarian thinking against the hierarchical class system of England, it also produces its own racism. The current situation with Brexit, for example, manifests that quite strongly. And of course, the USA, deeply egalitarian in ethos, of course, is perhaps driven the most strongly by racist forms of exclusion. So I was interested initially, in my interest in egalitarianism was in its paradox. Okay? So it was this background. I wrote a book about it, other articles. And it was that background that I had, and the experience that I've had in Africa. I worked for about 4 years in Central Africa, mainly in Zambia, which self-proclaimed independence movement involved breaking away from the chains of apartheid, for example, in South Africa. So I was in Africa at the time of the independence movement in what was then Rhodesia, which led to a very sort of white-dominated society. Also very egalitarian in certain aspects of the ethos, but produced this savage form of racism. So a number of experiences in this sort of situation, my own field work and so on. So this all is part of my own personal background to setting up this scheme, which was also relevant to Norway, my Norwegian friends. Will disagree with me in certain ways. But of course, Norway is a deeply egalitarian system, not unlike Australia in many aspects, but also has got structures of exclusion and control, so, which are part of the paradox of the same sort of thing that I was looking at in Australia. So the scheme develops out of that, and of course, it's very much influenced by the kind of work that Alain was talking about in his own presentation, very much influenced, at least the history of anthropology, as I know, as a social anthropologist, very much influenced by Paul Sauve and French philosophical figures. My own particular influence at the time still is quite influenced, and I'm still influenced by this, is of course the work of Louis Dumont and his work on hierarchical systems in India, also worked, and the relationship between his very important work, I think, on Homo hierarchicus, on the caste system in India, and in relationship to a very powerful understanding of certain developments in nationalism in Europe, and of course his own influence by the work of de Tocqueville in relationship to democracy in America. All of this was influential, for example, in my own work initially in Australia and in Sri Lanka, and was the background to the development of this project. Now, in the development of the project, I was very conscious, as I think most anthropologists are, about their Eurocentricity. The fact that their thinking and thought is really founded by European philosophical questions and work is, of course, very much influenced by it. But in this project, I wanted to somehow get a project together in the anthropological spirit of comparative understanding. The point about anthropology is, although it's a Western-based discipline accused by many people of being colonialist in its heritage, which undoubtedly it is, nonetheless, that's the idea of anthropology in its practice, trying to break from those roots in developing both a critical relationship to its philosophical and theoretical understanding, but also, in a sense, opening up to other possibilities elsewhere. And so one of the things that underpinned my interest in egalitarianism, not just in terms of the history of the subject and breaking away from some of its foundational elements, but was to sort of see what might have been, in a sense, in the spirit of the French Revolution, for example, something which was present everywhere in various kinds of mixture and formation, although it may not have been called egalitarianism or anything like it, even recognized as such. But this pressure that in all systems, I think, for people to, in a sense, try to realize themselves against various kinds of forces which may restrict them, prevent the achievement of what they consider to be their potentials or achievement of their opportunities, or in a sense place them in some sort of demeaning relationship to others. In a sense, if we look around the world, all peoples in some sort of way are expressing this kind of push, and often people well outside the Western conceptual or epistemological planes of understanding approach. For example, I would suggest that anthropologists, not necessarily well outside in reaction to, say, Western positions, anthropologists might recognize in current aspects of populism something not too dissimilar. I wait for my friends like Rio to sort of disagree. But to look at cargo cult movements, for example, in Melanesia and the Pacific, as having a kind of general populational upsurge about them, which stands against forces of domination and control that wouldn't have been expressed in egalitarian terms, but it was nonetheless something which was trying to reorder, restructure social relations in such a way that the kinds of lacks of opportunity that people had, or humiliations that they were feeling that they were receiving were somehow overcome. So there was these efforts to actually reorient the world in which they were placed. Not necessarily seen as egalitarian, but in a sense, many aspects that I think underpin egalitarian movements, even though they may not be regarded that way. Okay. So the actual project as it developed was to have a look at our own worlds that we were in, and there's been a focus on European systems to some extent. We had people working we had one woman working in on the sort of communitarian movements in America. We had people working on revolutionary, one person working on revolutionary activity in the Middle East. In fact, the situation of the Kurds in Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. We had people working on refugees, marine gold here. Knut was looking at Paris and looking at various other aspects of forms that relate to forms of inequality, for example, which is something. Beyond looking at war in Mozambique. We had people working on caste systems, for example, in India, ritual structures, and so on. There's always a limitation to how many things you can look at, on how many people you can employ and get them to get interested in particular kinds of things. But we're covering quite a vast array of different types of situations which were struggling against what they thought were the barriers, difficulties, oppressions, restrictions, constraints, whatever, on the realization of what they defined as their bigger issues. Now, so my view on egalitarianism is one which is initiated within the discourse, and I think all of us initiated in the sort of discourse about freedom, liberation, equality, etc. Within the West, which underpins all kinds of historical directions and social inventions, cultural inventions in the West. But we wanted to expand that and look at the limitations of those thoughts, of those paradigms of thinking within other kinds of contexts. I mentioned Louis Dumont, but he was very influential on me. We began our initial discussions in trying to get sort of various frameworks of understanding, working through someone. Now, what's interesting about Louis Dumont, if I can go over it for you, it relates to a lot of what Alain has been talking about in his paper. But what was interesting for me about Dumont was not just his comparative method, that is stepping out, very anthropological, stepping outside the context of the West. I think it's Dumont's argument that you can only look at the West effectively by going outside it, so that he emphasized a kind of anthropology that, which is, in a sense, a lot of that, that you have to go to something totally outside your own experience, your own immediate birth experience and history of growth, of intellectual growth. Go completely outside that in order to begin to question the very foundations of your thought. So, in a sense, anthropologists stopped now in anthropology, but the idea was to go outside your own cultural realm in order to throw your own cultural realm, the one that you lived and understood and had your prejudices formed in, thrown open to question by some other kind of situation which was not embedded in the same kind of thinking or practical processes. So, Dumont's very interesting. Dumont goes to India and he discovers a system that stands in contrast or in contradiction to the one that he experienced in the West. And in fact, he develops an argument that says that the problem with the analyses of India, particularly of what is seen as the sort of archetype inequality from the Western perspective cast cannot be sufficiently understood from a Western perspective. That in fact, Western understanding. Oh, I'm not allowed to go on, so I'm on 5 months. Oh, 5 months. Right. I've lost my time. But what he found was that what is underpinning so much Western thinking is that initially we are free individuals in a sort of Rousseau-esque sense, and that we try to recapture that idea, and this is fundamental to all human beings. So the idea of the egalitarian individual is a universal which underpins so much Western thought and thinking. And he goes to India and he says, look, that seems to be a wrong way to start. Actually, in fact, everything is hierarchy to begin with. And if we look at it from the position of hierarchy, he's got a very specific notion of hierarchy. He doesn't work with common sense notions of it. It's a very India-centric notion of hierarchy based in the ritual structure of caste relations. He discovers what he considers to be a universal in some place outside the West. The West is not the ground for universal thinking. And that he then gives various other kinds of position which, in a sense, collapses the opposition between egalitarianism on the one hand and hierarchy on the other. He sees egalitarianism and hierarchy as mutually implicated, that one is continually emerging and moving out of the other. And that in a sense, a hierarchical view of the world is perhaps where we should begin, rather than with the idea of the free individual outside certain types. I think the fundamental point in Dumont, one which is highly contested, is that the minute we have value in our understandings of relations, we have life. Hierarchy is fundamental to relational and valuation thought. So the tension will always be in systems, even when you've got the most egalitarian, to in fact produce hierarchy within the process. So it gets me back to the point, why a furiously egalitarian system, like in Australia, say apartheid, South Africa, or in America, also produces the most fierce forms of exclusions. He has a very complex and interesting argument in relationship to it. So, I suppose these things will be developed, I hope, as we begin to discuss. But the whole idea of the project was to have a look at, I suppose, my orientation was to have a look at struggles where people were actually struggling over their situation and trying to, in a sense, establish a new arrangement to their ways of life, which in a sense, in some way, freed them or placed them in a new relationship to people around them. So, in a sense, that is the egalitarian project, the way in which people move to shift or change or alter the instituted nature of their worlds, and the paradoxes and contradictions which are contained within the very dynamics of the way in which they establish that process. And have a look at it right through across history and in depth in particular situations. So we have a number of people with all kinds of different situations, with different types of problems in relationship to this broad issue. Ultimately, the direction of the project, I hope, and we're still working on it, even though the grant is stopped now, there's still publications coming out of it, which we expect after a 5-year period of research. We're still working on many aspects of it and trying to sort of go off in various directions. but I think the whole issue of egalitarianism, and it's a very, very broad perspective that we have in the end, is one which has ultimately very interesting theoretical implications for social science. But it's an anthropological position, which is theory is not born first and then you apply it, which is a very strong sort of positivistic attitude within the social sciences. Actually, theory is born out of the practices of human beings themselves, and the kinds of pragmatic problems that they themselves are confronting. I think an organic position is the kind of approach that anthropology would have. At that point, I mean, there's many, many points I can leap off on. At that point, I think I might as well close, but saying that in a sense, the egalitarian project becomes a project which takes a critical look at all the kinds of perspectives that have developed in our understanding of human practice and where human beings are going. But in a sense, we come to a conclusion, it's sort of Nietzschean, my own solutions, kind of Nietzschean in dynamic, that there's this endless circle whereby what looks to be liberating and freeing actually begins to operate its paradox, to reassert various forms of exclusionism, hierarchy, and so on, no matter how freeing and so on. And then there's then the sort of dynamic of social change process and so on. I'll stop there and let us continue what we're saying.
So what I have to sell is a bit different. It's philosophy in relation to politics, which doesn't necessarily mean that we have to disagree in disciplinary terms or along disciplinary lines. Okay, we will see. So I read my paper because it's too early for me to both think and speak in English. Okay, I read a lot. I read books, I read journals, I read newspapers, articles on the internet, messages sent by friends. I read, and when I bump into something that catches my attention, I write it down on a piece of paper. A quotation, an idea, a motive, whatever. Then I pour tea or coffee on that piece of paper, since I cannot refrain from drinking tea or coffee when I'm working. And besides, so it comes. This is where the expose begins. Years ago, I wrote down a wonderful sentence borrowed from a book I was reading. I put it aside, almost forgot it, but suddenly remembered it as I was asked to prepare a paper on equality for a seminar in France. I searched through my jumble, found it by miracle, but something had happened. The sentence was quite readable, but not the reference, tea or coffee. Since then, I have been desperate trying to find out where it comes from. In vain. My intimate conviction is that it is from Diderot. I browsed through many books by Diderot I'm more or less familiar with, and failed. For this reason, I will deliver it to you as it is, that is the marvel, the gem, but desperately yearning for paternity. It says this, and this is my translation: philosophy and wisdom are potentially distributed, répartis in French, in equal shares among the human beings, women, slaves, tyrants, day laborers, buffoons, and beggars, end of quote. It may not be Diderot, but to be sure, it bears the mark of the 18th century, for there is a word we don't use anymore in contemporary French in this sentence, manouvrier, which means literally manual worker, and in particular seasonal worker, that is the most humble category of worker. My feeling is that this sentence states or articulates such a strong proposition in so simple and direct terms that it is, as we first hear it, almost inaudible. Its hidden author doesn't tell us that all men or humans share common sense. He, because most probably he is a he rather than a she, for as you know, the philosophy of enlightenment is very gendered. He mentions in much more energetic terms philosophy and wisdom as what is potentially equally shared among humans, not men, as it would commonly be put in French, les hommes, or les humains. And when he makes explicit what he means by the humans, you have this fantastic enumeration of all what is supposed to be exactly the rest of the unpresentable leftover of universal mankind, or just society, properly speaking. That is a collection of subalterns, outsiders, underdogs, or monsters, tyrants and beggars, women and buffoons, and last but not least, slaves and precarious workers. You can see here how this approach of what humans have in common, and not only in common, but in equal shares, how vividly it contrasts with Descartes' standard phrase, formula, le bon sens est la chose du monde la mieux partagée, that is, common sense is the best distributed thing in the world. Descartes' formula is flat and banal. It's reassuring. By contrast, the hidden author's very ironical and counterintuitive phrase, this provocative sentence is a philosophical challenge, for it consists in saying, if you want to make a statement on what all humans have in common and that is distributed equally among them, you have to start not from the core or the middle, that is from the average human, the normal, the respectable, the acknowledged, but you have to start from the opposite, that is from the sides, edges, where the divide between inside and outside becomes indistinct, when the borders become porous. That is, these topographies where you meet those who are far from the center, that is the outcasts, the subalterns, the monsters, etc. If you want to make a general statement on what is distinctive for human as a species, then you have to go and have a look at this no man's land, where the humanity of the human becomes indistinct, contentious. This hazy topography which is inhabited by slaves, lunatics, beggars, and of course, women. If you want now to make a statement on equality the same way, you have to start not from the middle, the normal, the average, the reasonable as a norm or a standard, but from the fringe, from the limit, the border, where inside and outside become indistinct. And you have to say, even those who are on the fringe, even the dissented and excluded, the disparated, are equals. You even have to say more than that. They are those you have to take into consideration, first of all, if you want to think about equality, if you want to make operations or demonstrations about equality. This is how it works. The adverb even is the main tool in the operation that consists in exhibiting or displaying equality. Descartes' formula about common sense as the best distributed thing in the world suggests that we are all even in the face of common sense. By contrast, my hidden author's formula makes the difference between equal and even clear. We are equals as we are different, and the operator of inclusion even here stresses the fact that we are not the same. Each of the characters he mentions in his enumeration is a singularity and a contentious one as far as equality is concerned. For each of them is selected, is put forward as he or she is an equal, quand même, in French, that is in spite of all. That would incite us to think about him or her as an unequal, an outsider, an inferior, the madman, the beggar, the tyrant, the poor worker, and of course, the woman. Equality in that sense is not a moral principle. It's not something we have to claim for. It is what we have to start from. The presupposition of any political, by difference with social here, any political statement. It's an axiom, if you want. Starting from it, you will be able to make carrying all kinds of operations. That is, it empowers you by making of equality the horizon of politics oriented towards emancipation. Let me insist on that. Equality can only be convincingly argued for in this paradoxical way. For if you say we are all equal as we all of us are humans, we have a pact, all of us have a pact with reason. If you only say that, you fail. For there always will be a rest. A rest, that is something that cannot be included in this all, which is, if you read Descartes, the madman. The madman is the outsider of this kind of reasoning. So you fail. Or if you say we are all equal as citizens, you fail the same way. For what about the rest? What about all those who are the leftover of citizenship? This is why, if you want to make operations with or demonstrations in favor of equality, you always have to rely on this good old adverb, even. You have to put it forward. Let me give you briefly a few classical examples. In a famous text on law and justice, this on the occasion of a trial of, let's say, proto-terrorists who had tried to assassinate, to kill Bonaparte, the future Napoleon. This took place in the year 18. Benjamin Constant, Swiss, let's say, philosopher, legist. Benjamin Constant argues against those who claim, advocate for a special legislation against terrorism. Terrorism being something special, so we need a special legislation against that. We are very familiar with that today. So Constant argues against these people, saying that what we have to do is just the opposite. That is, that such a crime as it is exceptional and extreme, has to be dealt with according to the most ordinary criteria and procedures of criminal law. In other terms, even the most horrible crime, that is, a crime as a figure of, let's say, exception, even that has to be subjected to the conditions of common and ordinary law. This is the rule. This has to be the rule. In the face of the law, even the most exceptional criminal has to be treated as any other, subjected to be tried as the most ordinary chicken thief. This is the equalizing function of law. The same way, the renowned humanitarian medical doctor, French medical doctor François Itard, argues about the same years, the very beginning of the 19th century, that even the white child who was brought up in a forest in the company of animals, who walks on his fours and cannot speak, that is the famous case of Victor de la Véron, famous case of enfant sauvage, wild child. Itard says, and Itard had to deal as a doctor, as a medical doctor, with that child. Even this human animal, Victor, even him, has a vocation to be welcomed in human society and has to be acknowledged as an integral part or member of the common human body. Therefore, he has to be taught, he has to wear clothes, shoes, to speak, to read, to write, to count, etc., etc. So maybe you have seen the film Brossat from its L'Enfant Sauvage, the wild child. Even this wolf child, since he is a human, has to be considered as equal and is therefore educated and put in society at any cost. Equality has sometimes a heavy cost, for Itard actually failed in making Victor an equal, according to Itard's patterns, according to his own idea of what equality should be, etc., etc., and pass. So, as you see, this approach of equality contrasts with an approach through the legal scope that would consist in declaring us, all of us, equal in the horizon of a shared status, citizenship, notably, which, as I already mentioned, is inseparable from exclusion, all those who are the outsiders of this sharing. What this approach insists on is not the existence of a common norm that would, as it applies to all, that is included by creating a homogeneous field or space. On the opposite, it insists on the disparities, on the fact that equality has to be stressed in spite of the irreducibility of these differences and singularities. The part of the sentence that says that philosophy and wisdom are potentially distributed in equal shares presents a perspective that is distinctly different from the philosophy of equality, which is promoted by the French philosopher Jacques Rancière, in the present scope of French philosophy. For Rancière insists on the motto equality, égalité des intelligences, that is, equality in all humans' understanding or intelligence, taken into account as a given, something unchanging and immutable, an axiom maybe. The statement I'm sticking to is much more, let's say, related to Deleuze, for it insists on a possible becoming, devenir. That is, on equality as related to the potential or the virtual. For it means that any human, without any exception, that is, once again, even a woman or a beggar has a chance, that is the ability to have access to philosophy and wisdom. And not only this, to the same extent exactly as a Descartes or a Leibniz or any of the mighty ones. It seems to me that the adverb potentially suggests that such is not the state of things in the present condition. That is, in the conditions where and when this sentence has been coined. And as such, this potentially has a critical and even a polemical connotation. For it means that the present, our present, or the present, or the author of the sentence lags behind what this potentially designs in dotted line, the possibility for everyone to make use of his or her capacity to think and act philosophically, or by placing his or her thoughts and actions under the aegis of wisdom. There is something very energetic in this sentence. It has a whiff of what Nietzsche called great health. Great health. The tonicity shows that this sentence is some sort of a weapon, or that it is intended for launching an attack. This offensive is launched, of course, against those, many common sense, who think that naturally philosophy and wisdom are distributed unequally among humans, and that all the rest derives from that. Inequality in terms of social power, wealth, political agency and empowerment, inequality in terms of, let's say that in potestas, by contrast with potentia, directly derives, according to the doxa, the common opinion my hidden author is fighting against, from the natural distribution of capacity and abilities. So now it is time to ask ourselves whom the witty and ironical sentence I'm circling around is actually targeting. Where does the deep-rooted doxa is challenging come from, philosophically? Who is the invisible hand hidden behind this unstoppable logoria that says that basically it is not society that is implacably unegalitarian, but nature itself, and that makes that some have the talent for math and others not, that some are good at business and others not, that blacks run faster than whites, not to speak of the others, that some have a vocation to govern and others to be governed. That thick and somehow sticky common sense on natural inequality, where does it come from? The answer is Plato. A brief passage from Laws, in particular, where he deals with what he calls the two forms of acceptations of equality. This passage, which is not quite limpid, has been the object of fierce debates among specialists, which I am not. For this reason, I will try to go to the essential. Wow. So, okay, I will try to present Plato and finish. I had to skip the end of my paper. I stick to Plato. Okay, Plato says that there exist two forms of two kinds of equality which actually are not only different, but that conflict with each other. The first is what he calls simple equality, which consists in putting that one is equal to one, is equal to one, etc., etc., like in the formula 1 man, 1 vote. That means that any citizen vote or ballot paper has exactly the same value as any others, or as well that any citizen can claim to any positions, any other can, etc., etc. This primary, elementary arithmetical equality is the most widespread form of equality, but Plato says it is poor. Or there is another one, that is, he says, more, I quote, more true and the best. Not better, but the best, in absolute terms. But he immediately adds, not anybody can figure it out. In other terms, only the best, that is, distinguished people, can be aware of it and understand what is at stake with it. What does the superior form of equality consist in? It consists in granting to each of us what is appropriate for him or her in proportion and according to his or her nature. That is, according to his or her value and merits. Plato, the philosopher, is here much smarter than the ordinary man who thinks that institutionalized inequalities in social, economical, and political life rely on natural inequalities. What Plato advocates is a superior form of equality, and in that sense he could be designed as egalitarian. That is, he is advocating a version of equality that is based on proportionality, adding to this that this acceptation of equality is the only one which is in accordance with social justice and justice to who? The idea of justice. For this reason, it is this form of justice that should be taken into account as the basic, as the founding element in the city. In effect, it is the only one that makes it possible to avoid either a pure and simple monopolizing of all shares by one only, that is the tyrant, or a chaotic distribution of all shares among all, that is democracy in a pejorative, derogatory sense, the reign not of the demos but of the oklos, that is the mob, the unruly underdogs, the masses, etc. So in other terms, what Plato is promoting here is a form of equality that has been very energetically amended by or through what he calls a principle of proportion, which in practice has the effect of an injection of the poison of inequality into the body of equality. I imagine that this might ring a bell, or many bells, for you, because it has a smell, a look of, let's say, déjà vu. For, of course, what Plato is talking about here as a visionary, what he's dreaming about ahead is modern democracy. All the beauties of our democracies as they are precisely so egalitarian that they are just perfect oligarchies. The definition that okay, the rest was about how we can derive from Plato to modern politics with an example. French famous politician, Léon Blum. Okay, there is a sentimental aspect in it, but never mind. Let's leave it apart. Okay, thank you for
Before we open it to general discussion and question and answer, I've always thought that the best discussants are the speakers themselves. So perhaps I would like to invite each of the speakers, if they have any commentary on the other speaker. If this is okay, let's start with Alain, if you would like.
Yes, if we, as I said, there's no need for us to disagree. No, but if we, let's imagine that we should have to disagree on something. For the pleasure of the audience. I would insist on the fact that it should not be along disciplinary lines. This is the first thing. Because I'm presently working on something, and for this something I'm working on, I'm very much inspired by Benedict Anderson and Benedict Anderson's comparative method analysis. So it's not a matter of philosophy against anthropology or whatever. So it has nothing in common with all that. So my only, let's say, the only question I would have on what you said is the way you relate what you call radical egalitarianism to exclusivism and as a consequence of that even racism in a society like Australia or others in South Africa. What I would simply object is that, okay, it's not that form of egalitarianism which basically relies on a very narrow sense of community. For me, it has nothing in common with equality or even egalitarianism. So it's just, okay, community in the narrow sense, and in particular, in that case, it's not only related to exclusivism, it's related to extermination. So it has as presupposition the extermination of the others, that is down to the Aboriginal people. So any form of egalitarianism that would prosper, that would grow on extermination is for me a very grim, dire form of egalitarianism. So I would simply say, okay, I don't take it into consideration as related in any sense to equality or the aspiration of equality in any sense. Because it's basically related to being together together being placed under the aegis of sameness. This is ugly. This is purely and simply ugly. I detest it. So nothing related for me to what my horizon of equality and egalitarianism as an impulse for politics, because what I'm talking about is politics. Of course, maybe it's just a matter of objects. You said that you are very much inspired by Dumont, and I can understand that in terms of analysis of a given society, which is not Western, which has nothing in common with the Western society, okay, you have to displace yourself and think seriously about hierarchies. This, yes, I can understand what you when we think about political hierarchies, are what we are fighting with, to fight against. If you take hierarchies, let's say, as a value in terms of politics, so, okay, the discussion. So, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I know I can come in there. I think I disagree with you, but I'm not too sure whether that really gets to the point. Whether you can have a clean definition of equality is something problematic for me because, let me just clear one thing out of the way. I don't think anthropology is a discipline in the sense that often other disciplines have. It's really something which which crosses over and insists on a particular kind of empirical attitude which tries to ask what is it that people themselves are understanding about being equal or not, and so however they define their particular world. So that, in a sense, anthropology is always, or an anthropological attitude is continually empirically motivated. It wants to look at what people themselves are actually defining and creating and working. It's not working with pure, clean systems, but in the sense that divorced from practices in the world in some way or another. And I feel that your line, even though you declare that you don't want to be disciplinary about it, you are in fact being very disciplinary about it. You're actually coming out with a very nice, clean kind of understanding, which doesn't work too well in a whole range of practices. At this point, I'd sort of like to mention a wonderful little statement that appears in work by Lewis Henry Morgan, a difficult kind of guy, who did wonderful work on American Indian populations. And he also wrote about barbarism, which my friend, my colleague, Colombiano is interested in as well. And one of the interesting things that a very anthropological kind of let's get out of our own little cocoon position was that things went downhill when we somehow began to think that the Greeks were the source of civilization. All our thought came from, in fact, examining Greek ideas and then trying to push it forward. In fact, it comes to one of your points to begin your essay with. Let's look at the monsters. Lewis Henry Morgan's argument. Let's have a look at the so-called barbarians, those ones that are regarded as not being civilized. And so he goes and finds the Iroquois Indians, who he sees have a totally different view on the nature of the political, for example, and on the nature of the way in which human beings, as they understand them, should be organized. So that for example, the political operates under certain types of situations. It's distributed. It's not a permanent type of thing. It's something which is situationally organized. You have war chiefs, for example, who are in control of the situation in a period of war. You've got in a period of peace other forms of political leaders. You've got other systems of shifting kinds of economy. So all sorts of things which do not live in that integrated notion of the social and of power and authority and so forth, which are some of the basic assumptions that we live with and we argue with. So in a sense, the argument of an anthropologist, an early anthropologist like Morgan, was indeed to take your line. Let's go to the monsters, if you like. Let's look at the barbarians and find in the barbarians, or so-called barbarians, forms of solution to a whole range of problems that we find within our own historical tradition. And he would argue, and he did, whether that's acceptable or not, that our commitment to the Greeks, for example, as being the philosophical ground for our thinking on a whole range of problems is still, we should have a look at other systems that are totally outside that kind of tradition of thought. And maybe we arrive at something a little better. The sort of thing that, I'm not trying to be disciplinary about anthropology, I'm trying to say that it's something which everyone can do. That is, they can look at other kinds of contexts. Have a look at, for example, Marshall Sans's work, where he goes to the Australian Aborigines, and he says, look, if one of our values of something which is sort of equality, everyone should have the same sort of access to wealth, or the same kind of access to food and leisure and so on. Let's have a look at the Australian Aborigines. Nothing like the world which we come from, but in a sense, he sees them as the original affluent society, the society that actually was able to, in fact, distribute power, wealth, or what we understand as wealth, and so on, in a relatively equal way. Nobody was necessarily systematically disadvantaged in relationship to others. But it involved a totally different way of organising one's social relations and so on. It wasn't, and I think people who do anthropology are interested in that kind of position, ways in which there are alternatives out there, which are outside the kind of conventions of thought that we've established and we're committed to, which we can, in fact, arrive at some of the things that we might have in an idealistic sense. Equal distribution of wealth, equal access to educational opportunity, equality before the law. All these sorts of things that you're talking about can be achieved within other kinds of organizational arrangements and so on. At least that would be an answer towards the line, which is not working with notions of pure thought, but looking at ways in which people have addressed practical issues of routine concern and arrived at certain types of solutions that lie outside particular kinds of historical or even philosophical objectives. So it's not anthropology against philosophy. It's really, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to act in the world, or are we trying to have pure thought about it? And I think a kind of an anthropological approach, which I insist is not a discipline of religion. I think anthropology, everyone's doing it, you're doing that. But it's one which looks at the pragmatics of situations in relationship to the way in which they're solved organizations.
I think we've opened up the ground for many things here, so let's just have the audience participate in this. Bruce? Sorry. There it is.
All right, thank you. I think it's been a very interesting kind of a discussion. Bruce Kapferer brought up the question, the term hierarchy. So I mean, this question goes for both. The question obviously of sort of the relationship between hierarchy and inequality as concepts, and how we use those concepts. And because of course the title of the title of this workshop, kind of poses egalitarianism, versus inequality. And so I'm kind of wanting to, this hierarchy is sort of this odd third term, and the question is sort of what's the convergence and divergence between when we use inequality and what kind of leverage we get with it conceptually versus when we use hierarchy. In particularly because I was interested in, Bruce Kapferer makes this comment about sort of the issue of value, that when we're talking about value, hierarchy enters into the equation. Then if value is a measure of hierarchy, then what is a measure of inequality, conceptually speaking? If inequality we can conceive as the opposite of the lack of equality, then what's the opposite of hierarchy? I mean, these are kind of conceptual questions, but I think it really gets down to this issue of when we're using hierarchy and when we're using inequality. And I know Dumont kind of singles out the term inequality as kind of betraying that egalitarian kind of bias. Inequality has this kind of moralizing charge to it. Hierarchy perhaps is a bit more ambiguous. And relating, a different question is, when we're talking about inequality and egalitarianism, I noticed a lot of the examples we were coming up with whether it's in Plato is the level of the city. It's sort of a very bounded community, or in Bruce's talk, it's communities, particularly nation states, Australia, Sri Lanka. So immediately, the question I immediately want to put on the table, really for the day, is: what's the limit of only working at the level of that of a nation state? Can we talk about global inequality in a way that's not, or global hierarchy, in a way that's not simply the community level ideas of equality and egalitarianism simply writ large? Or is it a completely different frame of analysis? So just kind of the question of, are we only working in a nation state frame? And that's just sort of an open kind of reflective question. So.
Yeah, if I explain quickly, it's really a problem in our discussion. Probably muddied the water by introducing Dumont, because Dumont's great thesis is that hierarchy is not equivalent to equality or inequality. His argument is that the notion, the actual concept of inequality is really a Western vision, and which is, in the end, reduces to a kind of an economy. And so that our discussions of inequality are founded in a conception of social relations, which in a major way actually is highly reductionist. It's a form of individualistic thinking. And when he talks about hierarchy, he's talking about not about individuals, but a system of relations and the principles which underpin those relations. So that, for example, he has his interest in caste is that caste is not to be understood independently of a structuring of relations, a principle of relations. And to see caste in economic terms or in individualistic terms from a Western standpoint is to misunderstand the actual dynamics of caste relations, which can actually intensify some of the problematics of them as seen from Western conception. So it is the concept of equality in his analysis which is involved in the disasters of the Indian partition and independence in 1947. The ethnic distinctions that were the source of various kinds of human destructions were related to a highly individualistic vision of equality, which produced the kind of the particular kind of exclusionism which led to the extermination of human beings. And that's an idea which underpins, I think, a lot of work under in a kind of different register. That is, it is common in social thinkers these days, I think, to see the movement towards ethnic extermination or racial extermination or racist prejudice and so forth to be very closely connected to individualizing thought and to, indeed, to forms of, what Alain has been talking about, forms of equality which produce precisely the kind of things that I think Alain is very critical of. And that is a point in Dumont, actually. If we want to talk about equality, we're locating ourselves within a particular kind of historical tradition. We should be very careful in how we apply concepts born within that historical situation to other kinds of cultural worlds, and that certain types of application of those understandings into other worlds are systematic misunderstandings of those worlds, which contributes to some of the destruction that we witness within a complicated response. But I think the argument is to really be careful with how we use certain types of content, even those of equality, inequality, and universalism. And I think that would be the sort of line that I would take.
Okay, my question is actually for Alain. And I would say I like your presentation today, and I find it particularly interesting. I mean, with your the idea of adding the notion of even to all this statement of equality we are used to. But I'm just curious and wonder whether you can say a bit more about the status of the even. Because it's kind of asking about the relationship between politics, history, and philosophy. Because where does this even come from? Is it out of kind of historical contingent? Is it a kind of enactment of politics? How are we going to understand this even? And how are we going to understand the effect, political effect of any philosophical proposition when it comes to the question of equality? So then that would be related to my second question, because I might have a different reading of Hosier from yours, because I think what he's doing actually exactly is kind of against any kind of philosophical axioms. And he takes it as a kind of proposition or a kind of, what he says, a kind of political opinion, okay, which is actually requires demonstration. It's a kind of proposition which has to be demonstrated. It's not that you have a universal axiom and that can be verified by itself. So that's why I think eventually Hosier is a kind of combination of philosopher and historian. So I don't know whether you get my point. Or...
Yeah, okay, many questions have to be raised on that issue. So let's start from the beginning. I think we have to make a clear difference between ethno or anthropocentrism and this possibility, capacity for everyone to address a talk, say something on equality to everyone. I mean, I completely agree with you on the Greeks. The Greeks are barbarians like others, okay? And my talk is against the Greeks, Plato. So it's clear that my talk comes from the angle of the barbarian. I speak as a barbarian against Greek ethnocentrism. So this has to be clear. But at the same time, I have to show my capacity to address a talk on equality to everyone, anyone. And the fact is that I do it in French or in English, in a language which is directly rooted to the West. The concepts, the references, everything is Western in it. So how to pass from this situation to an horizon where my talk can be addressed to everybody? So this is my question. How can I solve it? How can I solve the problem? I give you an example. At the beginning of the Confessions by Rousseau, Rousseau describes a situation when, as a young man, he was some sort of a servant, a waiter. So he describes a scene where he is waiting for aristocrats, having a lunch or a dinner, and okay, this is his job. These people, they are the people sitting around the table, having their lunch or their dinner, are the society, in the sense the word society has at that time. The word society has completely changed in Western languages, its meaning, in sense, in the 19th century, to become something which can then be related to sociology, for example. But at that time, the ancient regime society means the people sitting around the table, excluding him, the waiter who is standing and serving, okay? So he's doing that job, and of course the people are talking, because according to Rancière, they are les parlants, the talkers. He's not. He's just serving. He's supposed to be mute. Okay. And at a given moment, these people, aristocrats, provincial aristocrats, there is a saying or a proverb, somebody says something about this saying or proverb, and in this proverb, there is a word which nobody understands because it's ancient French. It comes from ancient French. So they say, but what does that mean? And they are asking themselves. And, okay, Rousseau at that moment takes the risk to say, if I may, I will tell you what it means. Because he's an autodidact. He has learned by himself. He knows where that strange word comes from, and he knows what it means. And he says, if I may, I will tell you. And he tells them. They are surprised. They congratulate him and say, oh, how is it, you, etc., etc. And this is the most elementary base for an egalitarian politics. Because, and you see how conflictive it is, basically. He is the outsider. He's not supposed to know anything about the things which are in discussion. He's not supposed to open his mouth. He doesn't belong to that society, and he interferes. So there is some sort of a disorder. And this disorder shows a lot of things. That is that even he, in spite of the fact that he is just what he is, that is a servant, a waiter, he knows better than they do, those who are supposed to know. This is the basic element of politics, in my sense. He makes a wonderful demonstration on what politics is, as it has to be egalitarian. If it is not, it's not politics. It's what Rancière calls police. Just hierarchies over everyone has his or her place, etc., etc. Okay. So this is for me a wonderful example. It's very Western. Rousseau, it takes place somewhere in the northern part of Italy or whatever. Everything is Western in it. But for me, it is not Western-centric, because I think that starting from that small story, I can address it to anybody. Basically, this Rousseau, this scene, it could as well take place in Chinese reading. Anytime, Chinese actors, Chinese people, Chinese spoken, whatever. So, thought can travel. Thought about politics in the egalitarian sense, it can travel. It can travel beyond languages, okay, the roots of the word, all these things, references. And this is what I would like to insist on, because this, I mean, this figure, this notion can be, in my sense, reduced to anthropological terms. This is where the possibility of philosophy appears, as something which has to travel. This Rousseau can travel. He can travel. Anybody can understand that. The way a conflict can appear, which has something in common with equality. The equality of the plebeian in that case, because they are the patricians, he is the plebeian has something to say which restores equality, politics, and that's all.
Yeah, I don't think I disagree with a single word that you said. But I'm just trying to think how I would look at this. I mean, I think that I agree with Monsieur, absolutely, that as far as I understand it, the highest form of the political is democracy, as he understands it. And so his book on hatred of democracy is precisely that point. When he's looking at the attacks on, say, populists and so forth that are quite common at the moment. That in a sense populism is indeed the democratic form of which, however it sort of turns, but at least in a very sort of simple way. But I don't know whether that's the way. I think that influences the people on the project that I was involved in would accept that, I think, to a large extent. But I think our position is at another level, which is the kind of social processes, I'll put it that way, which are producing the kind of exclusion of the servant at that mean. And so it starts in another direction. It's looking at what looks to be the same thing, exclusion, but being produced under a different type of regime of principles. So, in a sense, the study of egalitarianism is, I think all of us have got some sort of ideal of what we understand that to be and how it should be transportable from one context to another. But as people working on that kind of issue, we're interested in the kinds of dynamics, the social and cultural logics that are operating that can produce what look to be a universal inegalitarian effect, but according to entirely often unexpected principles. Hence, for example, the exclusion of an untouchable in India from a meal is different from the exclusion of the waiter from the society of people at a dinner party in Paris. The principles of that exclusion are radically distinct. So much so that to understand one in terms of the process of the other would be to dangerously distort what that situation is. So if I was to move to India now, where you're getting tremendous movements towards economic equality, that economic equality nonetheless is systematically subverted in, for want of a better word, would be the ritual sphere. So when people that are understood to be untouchables become wealthy and begin to move and work in a particular way, that brings forth all sorts of hostilities which are not born of an envy of their wealth, but of the inappropriateness of their participation in a certain type of social relation upon which they're radically excluded according to principles that are not comprehensible outside that situation. So I think the kind of approach we might have towards egalitarian, and I absolutely agree with just about everything that but our position has been to have a look at the systematic process whereby what looks to be the same is actually inhibited with all kinds of further thought. So it's a different type of orientation. So I totally support the movement towards finding some sort of universal way of thinking about egalitarianism. But the study of it may demand other kinds of work, which may also reveal the dynamics under which certain types of inequality are produced, to come to sort of Derek's thing. Why there's unnamed people, I mean, Rancière very much influenced by Marxist thinking at certain points. I mean, the great egalitarian in one sort of way, I think the major theoretician of egalitarian forces from the Western perspective is, to my mind, still Marx. And all his stuff on theories of value, the expropriation of human beings into various other sorts of interests. So I think what we've done in the one thing that's interested us is, for example, the thing that you talk about, slavery. The nature of slavery is really worth a very deep look at. I think there's one person that's really worked on slavery that I think has not been read. I've been talking about it with my colleagues. Not been read is a guy by the name of Alain Brossat, who's done, I think, a beautiful comparative work whereby, in a sense, slavery is equated with a particular kind of radical social theft, whereby the person can look as if they're free and equal and in control and autonomous, but in fact is not their own person. It's a classic case of Ottoman slavery, for example. So the point is that, and he looks at slavery as in fact foundational, so the inequality of women is related to the fact that they are the first slaves, in fact, within the system that all human beings in different ways created. So what we're interested in is what I think are the kinds of social processes, cultural differences, if I can put it that way, which are producing similar effects at a surface level according to principles that are quite distinct and therefore problematic in the achievement of general ideals of equality along the Rancière lines that we talk about, or along the lines of democracy as the achievement of the political for everyone, which is Rancière's point, as I understand it. But all other forms of the political are not the political in this country. But so it's a different type of line. Without disagreement.
Question for Professor Kapferer, because I would like to draw from your yesterday's talk. Please use the microphone. Okay, sorry. A question to Professor Kapferer, because I'm curious about the dual polar between your yesterday's talk between transcendence and immanence, and also the relation between that dual polar and today's hierarchy and equality. Why I'm interested in that because they draw Spinoza, for example, like the immanence theory, which does also draw from Spinoza. Like we are all in God, we are all partake, and we are all within God. So and I feel that the relation between immanence and transcendence, and also the relation between hierarchy and inequality, which is a very classical opposition in anthropology theory. And because you work on these issues for a long time, so I'm also very curious about what is your thoughts on these two seemingly unrelated dichotomies or axes. Or you may position like the transcendence and immanence axis as the epistemological one instead of today's discussion on hierarchy and equality. Just drawing from yesterday's talk.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my important question, and I'm trying to get my head around it, because I'm in a very difficult position, because all the ways I'm thinking are continually shot from under my feet. You know? The point is, the immanence transcendence position is against certain, I mean, it relates to Deleuze and what we heard from it's a particular kind of position which it's a form of materialist. It's a form of materialism in which the ways in which is anti-hierarchical in a sense, or anti the idea of not considering sufficiently a particular world in which certain types of processes occur and subordinating it to another way of thinking. So the opposition between immanence and transcendence was simply arguing that an immanent position is, for example, like in animist religion, which is perhaps a form of thinking which is present within so-called transcendental religions as well. And that, in a sense, the assertion of transcendence misses some of the similarities that a transcendent theory of religion, for example, has with animist thinking. So that, after all, Christianity is full of immanent understandings, at least according to theologians and people who practice it, and that the sort of transcendental view, which is used to put down animist thought, refuses what is present within transcendental practice itself. Or put it another way, and this is the point about hierarchy and egalitarianism that I was fiddling around with badly with Dumont. Dumont's argument is not just that these are not clear opposites, but that the foundation of egalitarian thought actually is within hierarchy. If I could come to the end, I probably misunderstood it, but I could come to the end of Alain's talk. He, in a sense, says the same thing, but in a different ratio. The poison of hierarchy is present there from the very beginning. It's built in to the structure of even egalitarian thinking to a certain extent. So that would be the point about immanence and transcendence. But I'm taking that from Deleuze, where, in a sense, there's this effort to overturn dominant conceptual forms of thinking by looking at what I would call barbarian thought or minor discourse. Okay, it's in that other area that has been systematically suppressed that, in fact, greater understanding may be attained. I don't know. Alain, correct.
We started late, so I don't mind continuing it. We'll just shorten our break. But I did have one question for Alain, actually. The topic that he originally gave me was called Equality and its Fakes, or Contre in French. And we had to he not only changed the talk, but we also shortened his presentation. But I'm still interested in knowing, what about the fakes?
Fakes? Plato. Plato. The answer is plain, simple. It's Plato. And so, I mean, in the sense that Plato made, it's a tradition. So from Plato to nowadays politics, but in institutional democracy, statesmen, politicians, always they constantly talk on equality, of course. They refer to equality as one of the key values of democratic systems. But everybody can check and feel that these systems are rooted, deeply rooted in the opposite, that is market democracy. Basis of market democracy is inequality, not equality. So, and this you can derive it directly from Plato. What I had to skip was on something which makes me cry. That is the symbolic figure of the popular front in France. A politician, a socialist, a Jewish soul from Jewish origin, Leon Blum. So he is the symbol of all the popular hopes, expectations, which rose at that time, in 1936, as for the first time in the modern history of France, leftist parties came to power. And at that time, everything appeared to be possible for the working class. So, okay, he was the prime minister at that time. So as such, he became the emblem of all these hopes and expectations. A few years later, the wheel of history having turned, this guy, this fellow, he's in prison in a German concentration camp, Buchenwald, since he was not only a socialist but Jewish. Okay, in conditions which, deriving from his status, were not the ordinary conditions, but still in Buchenwald. So he's in isolation, he has time to read. He reads books. He reads a book on Plato, a book written by a French scholar at the beginning of the 20th century, okay. And he reads the famous passage I mentioned. He read that, and in his diary, he makes a comment on it, saying, oh, Plato is wonderful. He understood everything on how equality should be understood. Of course, he's right. Arithmetic, the simple, basic version of equality is no good. It's not something you can practice in politics. We have to refer to, stick to what Plato says on proportionality, inequality, etc., etc. And, okay, he makes that comment, he writes down in his diary. And at the end, he says, he writes something like, yes, equality is not everything, everybody equal for everything or whatever, but, how to say that, to each, I forgot how I put it in English, not easy. Each one has to be his or her, has to have his or her own, according, yes, in proportion, according to one's value and merits. This is how it has to be understood. So he completely sticks to Plato's version. And the horrible thing is that what he writes here at the end, it's about what was at the entrance on the gate, on the entrance gate of the camp. Jedem das sein eigenes. The Nazi camp. So at the end, he merges with the Nazis on that issue, which is the most horrible failure in terms of thinking about politics you can imagine. So, yeah, this is why it makes me cry.
One more question, any last question? Okay, John.
I wanted to ask you gentlemen about something. I am wondering if the appeal to Plato doesn't suffer from the flaws that Dumont found in the appeals, well, that you might find in Dumont's appeal to hierarchy in an Indian sense based on different values. I was struck by Bruce's remark that as soon as you have value, you have hierarchy. And the reason why that struck me is because I'm thinking of Amartya Sen's book on inequality, where he argues that all political systems claim to be fair, which means measuring value equally in one respect or another. But his claim is that the modern world is split between two different metrics for equality. One measures equality in human lives, one man or one person, one vote. The other measures equality in units of wealth, stock shares or wealth. So that someone who has $1 million, a dollar is equal to a dollar, is justifiably in a superior position in the great democracy of money to someone who only has $2 in his pocket. And what's happened there is it's almost, and it just occurred to me listening to you, that what Amartya Sen is talking about is what we might call the monetization of Plato. The shift away so that the value is no longer the value conceived of as virtue of a specific kind, but a thing that you can accumulate, and which turns society, which turns equality into a competitive game. I just want to think about that.
Any short response? You have the last word.
No, the rest of the day.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody and the speakers for their presentations. And we start the next session actually in 1 minute. Take your refreshments and bring it